First, let's say a very good morning to Michael Swain. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning, Jonathan. Great to be with you this morning.
Great to be chatting to you as well. So, talking about faith in public schools, specifically in South Africa, and what the law says that a public school may or may not do. So, let's just kick right into it. And is faith allowed in public schools in South Africa, or are we a secular state like America, where faith is not allowed in schools at all?
Well, I'm happy to tell you that even contrary to popular belief, we are very much a nation of faith. And the best place to start is obviously looking at our constitution, whereas you will recall from our many conversations, Article 15.2 specifically states that religious practices may take place at state or state-aided institutions. And of course, public schools are state-aided institutions. I think it's probably worthwhile stopping there and saying that we do not have a state school system. We used to under apartheid, but since we became a democracy in 1994, it is very much now a partnership between the state, who provides the facilities and pays the teachers and so on and so forth, and the schools, typically represented by school governing bodies. And so the Constitution says that, yes, indeed, religious practices may be permitted at public schools, but there are three caveats. The practice must comply with rules made by the appropriate public authority. Now, that was in question until the case that we can discuss in a minute was decided in 2017. It's got to be conducted on an equitable basis. That doesn't mean equal basis, but equitable. In other words, representing the faith groupings of the school. And that, of course, a religious observances attendance is free and voluntary. So we are not America, thank God. Perhaps two other things to say quickly. This only applies, what I'm about to say, to public schools, not to private schools. Private schools can have their own ethos and codes of conduct and faith-based constitution and that type of thing. And of course, no public school can teach a specific faith to pupils as part of general school lessons in school time.
That makes a lot of sense. So, talking about that court case that you just alluded to a little bit earlier, what happened there and what was the issue in Johannesburg?
Well, this case was brought by an atheist, a secular organization whose initials of their name spelled "Oh God," clearly deliberately. And they were basically trying to get the court to say that religious observances, and they listed 71, should be banned from public schools. They claimed that this meant that the school would basically have freedom of religion, but obviously what they were going for was for the schools to have freedom from religion. And 4SA was involved in that case. We assisted as a friend of the court. And the court basically said, no, religious observances are indeed allowed in public school. But one thing you cannot do, which I think is reasonable and fair, is that you cannot promote your public school as being of a specific religion in its name, its motto, its logo. You can't have Christian Boys Public School or whatever it is. You can't have a logo of the cross or Jesus is Lord as your motto or something like that. But thereafter, they specified the requirements by which you can have religious observances in public schools. And it's very important, by the way, that schools understand that this is now the case, particularly because the schools were tasked by that court judgment to produce a religious policy, which will obviously set out the parameters of religious observances, and it will vary from school to school. But the school governing body is the body that was basically tasked with that role.
That makes a lot of sense. So just give us again, with regard to those three requirements, what does it mean practically for public schools? What are some of the things that public schools need to be aware of?
Well, the school governing body needs to, obviously through a process of consultation with parents and pupils, come up with a policy that really decides what religious observances will or will not be allowed in a public school. And, you've got to consider things like, for example, holy days for the setting of test dates and exam timetables, whether or not people of faith, particularly say the Islamic faith, will they be released from formal school time on a Friday? What about religious instruction by external clergy? In other words, coming in outside of formal school time to assemblies and so on. Things like religious dress. Do you pray before sport matches, or do you pray during assembly time, or read scriptures? And also, of course, what about student religious organizations being established within the school? But it's very important to say, I think, that the parameters of that specifically said that it had to be on an equal basis. There had to be sort of not equality in the sense of one day Christian, one day Muslim, one day Hindu, one day Baha'i, or what have you. But it had to be representative of the school's constituency in terms of the learner makeup. Okay. And also, you've got to make provision for people of different faiths. You can't just favor one faith. You have to be able to allow for different faiths to also have equal time, so to speak. And again, this is supposed to represent the nature of the learner base of the school. And therefore, it could change over time. It may need to be reviewed. But of course, also very importantly, it must be free and voluntary. And that means you can't even put indirect pressure on. You can't have, for example, a moment where you point out people of another faith and ask them to now leave the assembly. That would be unacceptable. But yes, within those parameters, you can absolutely have religious observances in school. And I think many schools aren't aware of this. I think particularly they feel that somehow we are in that separatist state as they are in America. But that is absolutely not the case.
And again, just going back to the school governing body needs to make sure that the religious policy is in line with the government's kind of overarching information and things like that. And again, schools can connect with 4SA, right, if they want more information.
Yes, we've actually already helped some schools with forming religious policies. And it is so important to do that because, of course, number one, it tells people what is and is not allowed. And secondly, it offers you protection because, you don't want to be ambushed for doing something perhaps that you shouldn't be doing. And you do need to have a policy in place because that actually is what gives you the right specifically to have these religious observances in your particular school.
Fantastic. So where can people go to find out more about issues affecting our religious freedom, Michael?
Well, we have a website, which is www.forsa.org.za, or you can follow us on our Facebook page, which is Freedom of Religion SA. And of course, on our website, you can sign up for our newsletter. And that way you will get very important updates on all sorts of different things. I mean, we discuss one or two things, but there are a lot of things happening at the moment, Jonathan, which we can chat about next week. For example, one of the things that is worth noting, and we can chat about some other time, is that to this date, the Department of Education has basically blocked any, say, religious service taking place on a Sunday on public school premises. That was always permitted. In fact, it was one of the places where churches met frequently, particularly in disadvantaged areas. So we can chat about that. We're going to be contesting these things.
Brilliant.
And we can chat again in the future.
Michael Swain, Executive Director for Freedom of Religion South Africa. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you and the rest of the team, and we will definitely chat again.
Thank you, Jonathan. All the best.